Morning, everyone. Lovely to see you in Cape Town here.
Thank you so much, Sean. I'm so excited because after Ian's insightful talk on blockchain, and I'm thinking the only thing that's missing in this room is virtual reality glasses, because I feel that we're having a whole discussion almost like a sci-fi movie. You know, we've always been thinking that technology is a thing of the future, but actually the future is now. And everything is changing all around us, and we just need to make sure we catch the wave. And I see you are catching the wave so quickly because you're so passionate about all these new technologies. Tell us a little bit about how you got your passion towards studying all these new technologies, and just a little insight on Web3.
Yeah, thanks so much. So in 2017, I dipped my toe for the first time into Bitcoin. At that point in time, we had Vizam Alsani, who is the CEO now of Valor, was heading up a Foundry, which was an innovative center of ours. I went to a talk on Bitcoin, and obviously at that point, watching the price and getting quite excited, you know, about the possibilities. I really didn't understand what he was saying, but I just listened to him, and I was like, okay, let me go and figure this out. And so I jumped in. I then got horribly burnt and jumped in at the top, and came way down, and I had a lot of sleepless nights, and you know, a little bit of sort of sedatives to calm the nerves and etc. But committed then at that point in time that if I was going to play in this space, that I needed to educate myself quite significantly, and so I jumped in then and just have continued to expand my knowledge.
You know, Sean, from what I pick up, you seem like an adrenaline junkie. You know, you're those people who are not risk averse. You jump in, you laugh at the face of danger. Now, when you say that you got your hand burned, what do you mean?
Well, jumping in at the top of the market at that point in time, I'm sure many of you remember, you know, there was quite a lot of hype, and the Bitcoin price went, I don't know, from some ridiculous price, I think of $1,000. I think it topped at about 17 or 18, so I won't tell you when I got in, but it was certainly not at the bottom. And so, yeah, just not really, at that point in time, not understanding really the markets, and such new markets specifically. You know, the traditional markets are easier to understand in terms of the trends, technical analysis, you know, risk on, risk off, but new markets and something like this, and the volatility was like next level. So, you know, emotionally jumped in, jumped out, and etc. Lost some funds, as many people do. However, got a handle on myself and done a lot of education. Yeah.
Now I want you just to put you on your banker hat.
Yes.
And just juxtapose from obviously your investments and what you lost, because you just laugh at the face of danger, but help us understand in terms of the evolution. Yeah. You know, how are you moving and transitioning the bank with regard to the new technology?
Yeah, so I think it's such an important question, and you know, I just think if I listen to the conversations at our executive tables, and I speak to senior leaders and executives, and we speak to them a lot. In fact, 2 days ago, got off a call with one of the CEOs of one of our business units, and you know, exploring a use case for crypto, and he was like, "But I'm scared of this. Like, I'm scared. I was watching what happens with FTX. You know, so very common that our own traditional bankers are scared of it." So I bring to the fore a very important point here, and I think the point is, and it's Gert Leonard, who's a futurist. He says that humanity will change faster now in the coming years, in the next 20 years, than it did over the next 300. So I'll say that again. Humanity is going to change faster now in the next coming 20 years than it did over the previous 300. That scares and both terrifies me. And so I move the bank forward, and I look at core elements in terms of like, what are these converging technologies that are coming together and converging? And it's not just the crypto Web3, but importantly, you've got things like AI, you've got things like 5G, you see the whole health industry changing significantly. These are various technologies, not just one technology, with Web3 that are converging simultaneously, and that are simply going to change the landscape in terms of how we engage and interact in the future.
I love what you just said, to say humanity is going to change faster in a shorter space of time. And then I'm reflecting on the different industrial revolutions, that it took hundreds of years just to even get us here. When you look at the first industrial revolution, the second, the third, and now we're right in the middle of the fourth. Now, with that said, what is it that you can identify as key themes around Web3, and how is it that the audience sitting can take it and adapt it in their own environments, the key themes on Web3?
Yeah, so I think importantly, something just to be aware of is the absolute pace and rate of change, and as I mentioned, the convergence of these technologies. So with that, I think, through my research and what I've come across in the last sort of year or so of being obviously actively focused on it for the bank, is the first theme. I've got kind of 6 themes, and I'm only really going to talk to 2 key ones, I think, which are going to be valuable. I mean, I love that Ian came before me, and I love his language, and it's like, yeah, speaking like my foreign language here, I love it, and he's so knowledgeable, and I'm going to just drop a little bit more into that. So 6 themes that I see playing out, and there'll be more. First of all, there's the value shift, and I'm going to talk around that in a little bit more detail. And then I see something called the creator or ownership economy. And so Ian spoke around, Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, so I'm not going to reiterate that, but I'm going to drop into the ownership economy and the creator economy and why that's so critical for organizations internally. We then have, obviously, your efficiency gains. We heard a little bit about that. There's a major impact on CX. If you understand the metaverse, that becomes quite apparent. There is obviously your regulatory, your ethical, and your legal landscapes as well. And then the final theme, I look at talent, skills, and what does that mean for organizational cultures. So let me drop into the value shift. Oliver Wyman recently released State of the Financial Institutions 2022. And they just, it's a great article, and I already just took out like a couple of key things from there. But the value shift, if you look at from your total value in the industry, where you have these large market, or rather sort of asset intensive and heavy balance sheet. You've got heavy expenditures on the incumbents like banks, financial institutions, etc., your asset managers. And then you've got these capital-light businesses. So you've got your capital-intensive businesses, your capital-light businesses. And you look at the value shift in terms of the industry value that has shifted significantly over the last 10 years from your incumbents, which sat at about 90% down to 65%. Whereas your big tech companies, where investors are investing and etc., your big tech companies, your financial infrastructure companies, etc., their value has increased by 35%. That's quite significant if you start to look at that. Let's have a look at a couple of figures which also further demonstrate the value shift. And then what does that tell us about our clients, about our talents, etc.? You're seeing, for example, and again, Ian mentioned quite a few stats, so that was great. Some of the stats, in addition to what I've mentioned, for example, is if you look at the metaverse and the market size, in 2020, it was sitting at about 27 billion, predicted that this could increase to about 825 billion. So that's about a 40% increase over the next few years. You've got the likes of Goldman Sachs and Citi, and their reports are, predicting that something like the metaverse, for example, could be a 8 to 13 trillion billion dollar opportunities, with a number of, let's say, 5 billion, I think it is, users entering that space. The gaming industry, you're already sitting with 3 billion users in the gaming industry. Why is that important? And this links a little bit to the metaverse, and it's super exciting. I think it's exciting. Partly, and again a bit terrifying, because if you've got a captive audience of like nearly 3 billion users in the gaming industry, I have something that I call the one who owns the frame owns the game. That's an attentive audience that you've already got captured in the gaming industry who is intrinsically in a metaverse. What does that mean? If you're putting services and products in there, you have an attentive audience who you can sell to. Very important. Just another stat, for example, DeFi, in the DeFi Llama, this was in July, so it might have changed now given the industry, but they showed that DeFi, which has only been in existence for 2 years, was, in terms of asset under management, was equal to like the 31st largest bank. So I give you those stats to say, like, for me this says, where's the value shifting to? Number one, investors are shifting their money into other industries for higher returns on investments. It tells me that clients are interested. Ian mentioned a couple of stats on ETH and internet. At their peak on the internet adoption between 1990 and 2000, adoption was at about 63% a year. We're not even at the peak of adoption yet, and we're sitting on about 113%. 113% of users adopting sort of crypto per year. And this, if we go for the next, for example, 10 years to 2030, we're expecting, and you had to drop that to about 83%, you're looking at about 3.5 billion users. That's half the world's population using crypto. Value is shifting, our clients are shifting, and I think what else this is telling me is that there's a level of dissatisfaction in our current financial systems. And that one of the very interesting things that I find in this space is the social movement that is underpinning this movement to this decentralized space. People might not understand it, but they want sovereignty, they want freedom, they want that transparency, they want that permissionless. The second theme I just want to touch on before we move on is the creator and the ownership economy, which is linked to Web3. As Ian mentioned in his discussion, that says that me as a user, if I've got an avatar and I own that avatar, and now I contribute to evolving it, or I contribute to evolving that asset, I own a piece of that asset, I can sell it, it can be used by others, I can derive some kind of financial benefit from that. And there's various other aspects linked to that ownership economy that Ian did allude to. But with that comes the creator economy. We see the creator economy, and this is two important points for companies and large organizations just like ourselves, because it links into the talent and skills and the war of talent. The creator economy, and I can tell for myself, I went to Microsoft about 6 months ago and I put the goggles on and etc. And I was blown away because my whole pineal gland and right brain like literally burst open as I looked around the room in this virtual experience. I was allowed to build some stuff, and it was like I was just firing, and I can see myself as I've evolved in this space, like how creative I get. So if you've got a number of people who are in this creative environment, it stimulates creativity, and isn't that what we want in our companies and what we strive to have, is this innovation, fast-paced, and we're not innovating on top of traditional commodities like payments. Quite frankly, you just don't get the energy and the enthusiasm to be so excited. I'm seeing the excitement generated at the coalface when I speak to executives and leaders who are involved in this space. Ian, myself, or other examples, and we're like passionate, excited. We'll be in interviews, and everyone's like, there's an energy around this, and people want to get involved. The issue for talent and the war for talent is because of the borderless 24/7 economies that are being created. And again, we saw that created, and this borderless 24/7 economy says that I can constantly be engaging in any time of day and night with other countries, other people, etc. But in addition to that, it means there's increased competition, not just for my business through decentralized finance, but for my talent. Because I can now sit in South Africa and I don't have to immigrate and pack my family up, and I can work globally and internationally. So I think that's a massive implication.
I actually love your response because it's so nuanced. I mean, I'm looking at the room and I see banking executives. You're speaking about creativity. You're speaking about cutting edge. You're speaking about give the customers what they want. But in the environment that most people in this room operate under, there are regulatory restrictions. And now they need to lead. I mean, juxtaposing from being in an environment that's regulated, yet there's so much innovation, but there's also uncertainty and volatility. How do you then convince the leaders in this room to be able to lead and drive that type of the Web3 technology in their environments when it's not even certain? I mean, it's not certain, and the environment is so constrictive to being very much creative. How then do we balance between the two and make sure that the leaders in this room become equipped when they get to explore new technologies that they can propose in their environments?
Yeah, so great question. I think it's still a journey that I'm on. So I can often sit in executive meetings or presentations, etc. at Excos, and I can watch the kind of glazed look come over. So I've had to really learn over time how to simplify this language. So I'm going to just express a couple of things. As a leader, you're just never going to know this world at all. There is so much unknown and so much uncertainty, and I completely agree with you, but I am going to address your point in terms of what I think needs to transpire in organizations. So I think the first thing is, as a leader, get your hands dirty. Go open a wallet on MetaMask if you haven't already. What I've had fun with in some of the, we were looking at certain use cases, in particular use cases. We've been looking at them quite closely over the last couple of months and interviewing, like I said, like various leaders. And, sheepishly I'll ask at the end of the interview, do you own any Bitcoin? Do you own any coins? And sheepishly, it's almost like in the closet. Don't tell anyone. I own some. Which I have to have a bit of a giggle, but I think first of all, you need to walk the talk. And in this world, because it is fearful, you can hear Ian and myself. I mean, there's various languages. There's DAOs, there's DeFi, there's HODL, there's Phygital. That's in the metaverse, taking your digital utility and asset, and how do you make it into a physical utility? There's a whole language that you've got to rewire to. And so you have to get your hands dirty. Go buy a little bit of Bitcoin, go buy a bit of ETH. I've recently just been an early investor in a metaverse by a bunch of South Africans, so pretty excited. And I do it. I don't know where the project's going to end, but it's the only way I'm actually going to learn how this thing works. I think the other thing is, very importantly, is get uncomfortable with leading to the unknown. Not into the unknown and not through the unknown. And you simply can't turn away from it. And what do I mean by that? I mean this. COVID hit us and we had to lead through the unknown. I've alluded to a few comments ago. I said to you there are about 5 converging technologies. We have never in our lifetimes seen 5 different massive converging technologies that are gaining exponential traction converging at once. We might have had one technology that changes and reshapes things. So when you get uncomfortable because you don't have the answers to lead to uncertainty and to the emerging future, you start to set not just yourself up, but you start to set people up for success. What I've seen in this space is that the path will emerge. And so what do you need to do? You need to create these spaces, these sandboxes, even in within the regulatory boundaries, for people and your people, and encourage them to go and open wallets, get an NFT, get onto MetaMask, get that long digital number that you copy, and then you enter it, when you want to transfer funds, let's say between Luna and Bella, for example, and you're sitting there fretting because you just don't understand it. So you have to create these sandboxes to help this happen. The other thing is also to make sure that I would encourage, is to get a community together. It's something that we're busy driving at the moment. Volunteers. I think we've probably got about 300 or 400 volunteers, and we're running 4 streams. Volunteers, discretionary effort from across the bank. Had a few introductory meetings. This is what we're doing, Web3, whatever, pitched up. And it is amazing what crawls out from under the carpet and through the cracks. And because it's permissioned and spoken about, that's really, really critical as well. Then I think what's really important internally is that you really have to start considering building off. It's something that I don't feel that leaders do very well, including myself. We very often focus on the future and where we need to go. Build on self-efficacy. This is not about building resilience in your organization for what's coming or for meeting and leading to in order to start stepping towards an emergent future, you want to build on self-efficacy and not necessarily resilience. Resilience is like, I think we're all over resilience with COVID and stuff like that. So self-efficacy says, how do you encourage people to know and have confidence in what they're able to do, and the challenges, importantly, that they are able to meet? We need 2 fuel tanks generally in life right now. 2 fuel tanks. Number 1, the first fuel tank is acknowledge and celebrate what you've accomplished now in your organizations and do it well, and make sure people really embody that so that they can fuel up the second fuel tank, because it's going to take a lot of energy to figure all of this out. And the fuel tank is that future vision. Because ultimately, you want to inspire people, you want to have a vision of the sea, and you want to make that sea so appetizing. It doesn't matter where you really take you know, what your vision is, but you're going to make that vision of the sea so appetizing that people just want to get on the sea. And only once you create this really appetizing vision of the sea and what the possibility holds do you then build the boat. Organizations, and I think leaders now, what they try and do is build the boat first, and then this is what we're going. And you kind of got to flip that.
I love that. You know, yesterday we were the unpacking of the banking ecosystem. You've got neobankers, you've got the traditional banks, you've got fintechs. You have a myriad of stakeholders that need to be a part of it. Now, how then do we encourage traditional bankers? What are the things that they need to look into if they would need to apply this in their environment? You mentioned that to promote sandboxing and elements whereby one can be able to experiment. But what is it that we need to encourage somebody in a traditional banking environment to say, this is where the future is going? I mean, Ian's presentation was fantastic. Now, I'm just thinking, even if you sandbox, how do you practically start such an initiative within a traditional banking environment?
Yeah, and I think sponsorship is so key, and I think probably Ian can attest to this as well. I know, you know, despite my sort of more full-time focus now, you know, for the last 4 years or so, I've been talking some of this language, and it's been met with like, what is that? I don't understand it, and etc. I think with bankers, first of all, and this is the big challenge, one of the big challenges that leaders will face is how do you shift that mindset, right? Sponsorship is critical. So you need that one sponsor who gets it, and they do exist in the organizations. I think the other important thing, bankers like, you know, facts and figures, but I think the mindset shift here and the huge cultural change, and even at the executive table, is experimentation. So understand the regulation first of all. So we've recently had change in regulation, so some of you may be aware of what that means or what that doesn't mean, but that now permissions bank, and it gives permission to go and experiment. So I have this quote in my head that says, "New roads need new maps."
I love that.
New roads need
It deserves
new
a
maps.
round of applause. I love that. Can we give a round of new roads need new maps?
We don't have the map for this.
Right.
But we do have a bit of a road now with the recent regulation. And that little piece of road that says now, at least with our retail consumers, that we can play, you know, in this sandbox. That also means, if you understand the regulation, and maybe I'll just quickly touch on a couple of points around that, is that, you know, the intermediaries have to be licensed with a crypto asset service provider license. So that means there's KML and there's KYC and etc., which is critically important to start bring that safety, that security, and that trust into the ecosystem, and that it kind of puts everyone on the same playing field. So with that, so then becomes, you've got your phase and your FSP, and so that means that even the advisory services that we can start engaging into, which is really critical, means that the advice that we give, and depending on the client, is that we obviously have to know around the product, and are we matching the product to clients. So that's just at a very high level. So needing to get a community together, and you're needing to practically on the ground say, right, how do you, if new roads need new maps, you have to be brave enough to disrupt and challenge yourselves. Establish a capability with the mandate that can disrupt your traditional businesses and even cannibalize it. And that's pretty terrifying, and that's not so comfortable. Ian mentioned it, resisting change. I come from a background of change and transformation, and I can tell you right now that I only see generally 30% of people actually going through transformation, because why? On personal transformation, it's a self-identity, it's your self-concept that needs to shift. So let's take that into a systemic view. What's the self-concept and the identity of a bank? It's steeped systemically into trust, and this is the way we think and do in traditional sort of financial instruments and that kind of stuff. You've got to reshape an identity somewhat, and that's a journey in itself. So coming back to some of the practical things, you're going to have some kind of capability with sponsorship that says, right, here is some funds, dedicated focus. for 3 years, I did it after hours, I did it behind the scenes, made my trades, like whatever, especially when there's a bull market, 2 o'clock in the morning, and I know there's some crypto junkies out there in this audience. When you're in a bull market and we're climbing up to, let's say, $70,000 US, you're doing a trade at 2 or 3 in the morning. It's kind of exciting. Anyway, joking. But so importantly, have that capability. Then you need to start establishing some evaluation frameworks. Because you can't look at this in the traditional way, and you can't use you can use some of the traditional tools and methods, but there's an evaluation framework that you can start looking at, so you can take your use cases specifically in the context of let's say, for example, the regulation. You want to be able to have some kind of evaluation framework to say, cool, we've got whatever, 50 use cases that we're thinking about, but now what's actually going to deliver and potentially deliver tangible results? And you want to be able to build that out. And then obviously you're looking for effort and return and et cetera, and you want to be able to prioritize that. I think the other important thing is, you can't just build capabilities, and I'm sure Ian will agree with this. Things need to be sequenced in a certain way. So you've got some full-time focus on this. You need to sequence certain capabilities out that can support the maturing market. If we've got one level of regulation now, future level of regulation is coming. But if you sequence capabilities that can handle the complexity and build them in that way, I think that will also kind of set you up for success. So, there could be a shift in terms of how you look at the gates, in terms of how do things traditionally get, in different organizations is different, but how do things go through different gates to actually become like that's a product with production support and all of those kind of good things, and operationalized and monetized. I think that's got to flip a little bit. And so really just thinking carefully around how you get things through certain gates, which, as I mentioned, can be through an evaluation process. You don't build out the big business case first. You've got to get a small POC going, test that out. Most critically is customer involvement and sort of interbank involvement, and I think Ian mentioned that as well. There's a huge piece of it.
Fantastic. I've got so many questions, but I want to ask the audience if they would want to ask you any questions based on your very exceptional responses. Any questions from the audience? Are we good?
I think Ian answered a lot of the tech questions, was
okay,
useful.
So if we don't have, my last one. So yes. How do we chart a way forward in terms of leading people to the future?
I think my final comments is safely.
Safely.
Somewhat safely into the unknown. That means taking one step at a time. Obviously you're wanting to have some kind of future. However, there's ethics and there's regulation. We have a massive, obviously a massive client base as well as employee base, right? So you want to leverage that trust. I think there's a good opportunity to leverage an already established trusted relationship. There's still a long way to go with crypto, with the industry and et cetera, and so we do have time. And so just starting small, so my kind of final comment is really about, again, I'm just going to say, get your hands dirty. At least get one sandbox where you are, for example, being able to test with retail customers, something like a custody solution, for example, or something on the exchange or a partnership. Get clear on your ethics, get clear on some of your principles, and then open up the conversation in your organizations and demonstrate, like I say, walk the talk. And I think it is, when we're walking the talk, even in a small way, this is not saying that go and spend a fortune in this space, but just start walking the talk so that it encourages people just to safely dip their toes in the water.
I love that. I love that. You're so phenomenal.
Thank you.
I really love it. And thank you so much. Ian, you were sandwiched by very powerful, strong women in this industry. And Sean, I just appreciate everything that you brought to the table. Let's give her a round of applause for her exceptional work.
Well, thank you so much. It's been lovely. Thank you, everybody.